Drova. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I'm confused about this. Like, not about the game. The game is great and you should absolutely go play it. That's the long and short of this. But really, the situation by which I've acquired the game leaves me baffled. Like, I was checking my email earlier and for some reason, under the business tab, I had an email from Deck 13. That's a big name publisher. I've played some of their other games. They put out Lunistis, and that was a really cool game. And Chained Echoes, which they seem to acknowledge that I even mentioned once. And they were sending me a free copy of this. Don't they normally do that to like big names that have a lot of clout and stuff? I'm very, very thankful people want to send me free stuff. I'm just confused as to why this big publisher thought I was worth giving a free key to. The point is, this game is great, I just don't understand why I was given a free copy. The story to Drova is pretty deep and interesting. It starts out with some warriors from this medieval tribe coming back home after some sort of victory, carrying home this mysterious glowing gemstone. Your local druids decide to remove the gemstone from their possession and take it into the mists, hoping to find basically some kind of legendary plane of existence where everything is awesome, more or less. It feels basically like Valhalla to me. And you, being the curious person that you are, decide to follow them. Except everything kind of goes wrong from there, because on your way, everyone gets lost in some mist and eaten by some boars. Except for you. You've been tasked with taking this gemstone to find the druids in this mystical realm. Except it's not that simple, because this realm of fantasy and legends, it's a little grimier than that. Unfortunately, it's a place of death and corruption. The people who do live there are split into two different factions that are actively trying to kind of war with one another for either trying to escape or make the most of it here. You have to deliver this to one specific camp, but you could join the others and try and flee. There is so much going on here, and it's a very cool, very mysterious, very dark plot. It gets very, very dark very quickly, and I kind of appreciate it for that. And likewise, while the story itself is relatively deep, I appreciate that on the minute scale, there is a lot going on for it as well. All the characters seem to have interpersonal relationships that you can talk to and figure out how they connect to one another. If you do something that affects other people, you will hear about it. For example, I tried to impress this one higher up military guy to join his faction, and part of that involved going on a bender with him, hunting some really dangerous game, and then hopping up on a table, stripping, and then running to go desecrate some sort of holy religious ground. And not a single person in the city will let me live that down, but you know what? It was fun, so that's awesome. I really appreciate the deep and interconnected characters here, and every single character and even corpse that you find, it feels disconnected from everything else, but slowly you end up getting more and more information to piece things together. I remember finding this random corpse out in the wilds, and it's like, oh, okay, well, it's just a body, I'm gonna loot it and I'll be on my way. But about 3 hours down the line, I talked to someone else who completely contextualized who that body was, what their whole deal and their connection was, and how that affected a lot more people. Clearly there has been a lot of work put into the characters and world building of this game, and I approve. I have noticed there are a few bits of the writing that just kind of take me out of the moment though. Like, we're in ancient mystical afterlife-y sort of place, and yet people are throwing around words like crap and dude, and it feels a little, look, I'm not expecting ye olde English or anything, but when I see common modern phrases, it just feels off, you know? It's a small thing, but it stands out to me. I think for me specifically, the story itself is really interesting, but I think in terms of story, some of the best bits were the stories that I created from my own adventures, just random stuff that happened. And I actually recorded a few because I was so excited about what happened and how interesting it was. This is definitely a sort of emergent storytelling sort of experience for me specifically, and it was a lot of fun like that. And I'll tell you right now that this game just provided the most organic adventuring experience I have had in a very long time. I'm so excited about this. I'm actually recording this before the rest of the video. I just played it and it was fun and I want to talk about it. So I'm in the tutorial starting camp area, and I'm told to go find a hill to dig some pits for storage. What they mean is that you have to go up a slight incline like 5 feet to the right of where the guy gives you the quest, right? I guess I missed that part. Instead of traveling 5 feet, by my own buffoonery, I ended up on basically the other side of the planet, and it was an absolute blast. So I'm looking for this hill, which I think is to the north of this camp, and there are a bunch of hills up there, so I feel like I'm on the right track. I end up going through this huge forest with like all these little tiny ant guys actively attacking me. They were kind of tricky. I ended up going a little bit more north in what felt like a secret passage hidden by some bramble bushes. This really tough dog-like thing almost destroys me, and yet I persist. I find a little cave, and past that I end up in another forest followed by some ruins. And around here I find a bunch of giant ant enemies that will one-shot me, and some harpies that will also one-shot me. And they happen to be guarding a polearm I can't equip because it's 50 levels above me. Which, yes, I did steal at level 1. I find a sword that's trapped across a river that I actually have the ability to go get. I think it's in my inventory. It says I have this ability, but it says I also need a rune stone, so I guess not. And I end up going on this huge quest and ending up in this other ruin, which just has a guy in it who tells me to go away. I was wandering around completely lost for about 3 hours when I could have just moved 5 feet to the right. Now, granted, this is because of my own ineptitude, but as someone who values an explorative nature in games and someone who really does enjoy having an adventure, this gave me one of the most classic Dark Souls-y kind of experiences for me, even though this isn't really a Dark Souls style game. In every good Souls game, there's a point where I just get fed up with having to respawn and go through the same areas over and over. I get a little cocky, I have to start avoiding enemies to cut down time, and at some point that bites me, and I'm being chased by about 1,000,000 enemies, and I have to run completely full tilt without any way of figuring out where I'm going, because I will definitely die. I'm running entirely on instinct. Here, apparently, the equipment in this area is 50 levels above me with enemies that will one-shot me. I have to avoid all of it. I found like some ancient sigint and like some pieces of a legendary armor I can't equip, and like everything around me is going to instant kill me, but I just have to keep running. And when I finally feel safe, I have no idea where I am. And when I was well and truly lost after all of that, that was one of the coolest adventuring experiences I've had in a while. That adventure alone was worth this game to me. And in order to solve this quest, I just need to move like 5 feet from the right of the guy who gave it to me. I love getting lost in adventures like that, and this game gave that to me, so I'm already pretty happy with it. And I've only got a couple hours in on it so far. And I had another amazing adventuring story I just felt I needed to share with you. So, I just got this new job as a miner, yeah? And I'm skipping down the path, just having a wonderful day, living my best life. 2 new friends meet me on this path, and they're so thoughtful, they even suggested that they hold onto my wallet just to keep it safe. Super nice of them. I decided to keep skipping down the path, enjoying my life, and they even want to join me. In fact, they're so nice they want to show off their cool new weapons by swinging them in the air. They're so concerned about my safety, they even tell me they're not going to let me get away. Seriously, super thoughtful friends who just want to keep me safe. I like these 2 a lot. These 2, they're so nice and thoughtful. Heck, they even go and try and stop this bird that would definitely one-shot me. They were so thoughtful that while they were busy hanging out with this new bird who would one-shot me, they even let me sit here and try to pick this lock on this mysterious hatch in this ruin. And heck, they were so generous, they gave me all their experience while they were playing with this bird, and all of their worldly possessions when they decided to take a nap afterwards, before we parted ways and I went exploring this mysterious cave. These were the best friends I've ever had. As it is a PC game, I am playing this on a Steam Deck, and I can report that while this game is currently, at the time of recording, not labeled as supported, it works 99% of the time. I ran into 2 things that are concerning, and one of which seems to have fixed itself. The first thing is that I couldn't enter my character's name. Like, I had to invoke a virtual keyboard to do this with my controller, and it would immediately get disabled after I typed 1 letter, so our character is just going to be known as F forever. But we all know it stands for Fantabulosimo. The other issue seems to have fixed itself, but the day after I started playing this, the graphics kind of completely broke, and like I said, I'm pretty sure this has been fixed and addressed in an update already, and I think I might have been the only person who was affected by this, but I did record some of this just to show you that this did happen, and yeah, all the graphics kind of broke, so that happened. But otherwise, if you're playing on a Steam Deck, it works fantastically, and aside from the naming thing, I don't think you're going to run into any issues whatsoever. This game is awesome for the Steam Deck. Now, at the start of the game, you are presented with a character creator. You can change your character's hairstyle, hair color, skin type, body type. It's really impressive how deep this goes. There's like 30 options for basically everything. And this actually is further reflected in other visual customization options down the road, such as the equipment you get. They will actually change your character visibly, and even different weapons in same weapon categories will appear differently on your characters. One sword might look a little different than another, or a shield will look a little different than another. It's such a small thing that would take so much work to implement, but the fact is, it's awesome, and it makes the world a lot more lived-in feeling, you know? I love this. This is a great bit of customization, and it just allows me to further connect with my character. Thumbs up for this. Once you actually get into the world of Drova, I think a lot of people would kind of compare this to a Souls-style game, and combat-wise, there's certainly a lot of parallels there. The combat is fairly slow and deliberate. You have a health bar, you've kind of got like a stamina bar that dictates how long you can guard or dash away from enemies, and combat itself is actually kind of a dance more than anything. You are actively having to manage your location, your positioning, as well as your opponents, figuring out the timing and tells of their attacks. And the thing is, while you have a bunch of moves and special abilities at your disposal, they all have a kind of rhythm to it. If you just try and mash your attacks, it will be nowhere near as efficient as understanding the proper timing to get attacks out more efficiently. So yeah, it's kind of a rhythm game too, in a sense. And that makes combat a lot deeper than you might initially assume. You have to slowly find openings in your enemy's abilities, utilizing your various different combat styles. Fortunately, there are a bunch of them, and in general, you don't seem to do all that much damage, at least at the start, but individual levels seem to pay off exponentially. Like, fighting one of the earliest enemies in the game, a low-level rat, would take like 4 or 5 hits, whereas you come back a few levels later with like a different weapon and they'll die in 2. So individual stats do seem to have great effect in this game, and you shouldn't scoff at individual stat bonuses and small minor stat increases. They do seem to go a long way. There are multiple ways of fighting in this game and multiple subdivisions of ways to fight within that. I tended to stay melee because that's how I like to play these games, but even within just the melee department, you have sword and board fighting, you have axes which are slower than sword and board, and you don't have the defensive options, but they do a lot more damage and have a bigger hitbox. You have knives, which are even more dangerous. They're faster, they do a little bit less damage, and you have to rely a lot more on dodging. And what I ended up kind of landing on, and I'm surprised about this, was spear and shield as my main way of fighting. While the hitbox leaves a lot to be desired, you have a lot of room to work with. You don't have to rely on ammo, so it's basically a ranged attack without any of the downsides of ranged attacks. Plus, you can use a shield if you want. I really ended up enjoying the versatility of this, and I didn't think I would because I'm not really a spear kind of guy, you know? Every single one of these melee options has a skill set you can spec points into, provided you've leveled up and earned those points, and that you've found a teacher who's willing to train you. From here, you can boost your individual stats, which boosts a sort of combined stat that's like combat proficiency, and this will dictate what sort of equipment you can have. And combat proficiency is based around overall strength, dexterity, and like magic ability. Sort of like background stats that sort of influence your individual skills. But you can boost individual abilities and skills within each of these subdivisions as well. For example, when I first started, I was playing pretty much sword and board, so my first thought was, okay, there's an individual skill I can spec into that gives me plus 10% to sword attacks. Obviously, I want that. And in turn, that unlocked a new special ability I can invoke in combat as well, specifically for swords. There's also ranged abilities, such as fighting with a slingshot or bow. Now, bear in mind, these require you to actively pick up ammo, either rocks from the river for slingshots, or you have to craft arrows or find used arrows in the field for bows, but it works more or less the same way. Magic, on the other hand, while it does exist in this game, if you want to play a mage, that's a lot less viable, I've found. In the game, there are usable scrolls that give you one-use consumable magic, and weirdly enough, one of the first things the game tells you when you find one is you should definitely not just hold on to these, you should use them. But because they're consumable, you might not really know how the specifics work, such as like its hitbox or how much damage it does, or really give you any perspective without using it. I ended up using one because it just said, hey, just use these, and I found, oh, these are consumable. Well, I just wasted that. Oh well. And that kind of sucks. And while there is a way to not make magic a consumable one-time thing, I think I'm like 20 hours in and I have yet to run into the ability to do this. You need something called a rune stone, which I think you only get in like the penultimate chapter of the game. And again, I'm 20 hours in and I've yet to see one, but to be fair, I'm exploring everything and I stray from the critical path all the time because I'm an explorer. So if you want to be a mage, yeah, you're going to have to stock up on consumables or something, and I don't think it's going to be that viable a way to play early on, unfortunately. But the nice thing is, there are numerous ways to play. In fact, the best way I found to fight in combat was to kind of, not just allowing enemies to either kite themselves into like bramble bushes so that they die from passive bleeding damage on their own because of their own stupidity, or get enemies to kill each other for me. However, there are a few problems in terms of the programming with that. Enemies that die not directly by your hand are only sometimes going to give you experience. When I got enemies to basically kill themselves exclusively through bleed damage, it was about a 50-50 shot whether or not I got experience for it. And I mean, fair enough, but I'd like some form of consistency as to whether or not I need to contribute X amount to get a reward or something. It just seemed a little unclear to me, but that could be entirely because I'm fighting in a sort of unintended, sort of esoteric way. And likewise, when I was sort of tricking NPCs into fighting each other, the game's programming got a little bit confused at times. Like, if you pick a fight with an NPC and you lose, they won't directly kill you, they'll bring you to like 1% health and then loot your body and then you'll revive after a while. If you pick a fight with an NPC and then go fight a monster, if the monster kills you, the game still assumes that the NPC is the one who did it to you, so you won't die, and the NPC will get dragged into the fight with the monster and probably get killed by them, and you'll get experience and just revived. I don't think that's intentional, but I appreciate that playing as a sneaky bastard in this game is totally a viable strategy, even if the programming doesn't necessarily like you doing it, and you can still be rewarded. That is a lot of fun, and it honestly ended up being my favorite way because you kind of had to think in 4 dimensions how to fight enemies in certain situations, but it meant that you could tackle areas well beyond your level. I really appreciated that this was considered valid, and I did actually get rewarded for thinking about it. And I feel very, very smart and sneaky for it, and it was a lot of fun. Basically, there's a lot of different ways to approach combat, and everything seems to be equally valid, and you can kind of spec into everything if you want, and there's some rewards for doing that. My only real gripe with it is if you are into mage combat, and to be fair, I'm not personally, but I know a lot of people are, you're gonna be kind of at a loss very, very early on, and it's not gonna be until much later in the game you're gonna get a runestone so you can actually use magic skills a little bit more reliably, and I think that's a shame. And I'm definitely not just saying that because there's a sword and a stone I can see, and I need a mage spell that I actually have to get it, but I don't have a runestone to do it, but I really want that sword. This is gonna be one of those things that haunts me for the rest of the time I play this game. Just, I'm never gonna forget that's there, and every 10 steps I'm gonna walk all the way back just to see if I can try and get this thing. And by the end, I'm probably not even gonna use it, but the fact that it's there taunting me bugs me. You've made a reward that's enticed me. Well done, developers. What's also interesting is you can spec into other things that aren't directly combat, although the game doesn't strictly tell you about this. You can pick up skills from various hunters as to how to gut creatures to get more resources so that you can cook more stuff, which is also a skill that you need to learn recipes for. There's a lot in here. It's actually a really deep game when you want to focus on the stuff that isn't direct. Blacksmithing skills are stuff you can spec into. I went and took a job at a mine just to try and get in with one of the factions, and wandering around I ended up doing a bunch of like little tiny mini quests for all the different miners, and they all taught me how to mine better. So instead of getting like 1 chunk of silver for every vein I hit, I'd end up getting like 5. There is a lot of little side background stats you can level up to make your time in adventuring a little bit easier and a little bit more profitable. You can learn how to pick locks and pick locks much, much better, and I'm sure there's parallels to fishing and other things as well that will allow you to get more resources for less work. And I appreciate that everything here can be quantified and spec'd into, provided you're willing to put in the effort and probably resources to actually find it. That's really cool. There is a lot here mechanically that I like a lot. Exploration-wise, well, I'm a huge explorer, and I gotta say this game kind of hooked me greatly. So much so that I was exploring areas that were not made for a level 1, that I had to get enemies to fight my battles for me just so I could get through. And I ended up with a weapon for a level 70 proficiency, and I'm still quite proud of that. Yeah, there's a lot to explore in this game, and in fact there's a dedicated sort of observation button. You press in the right stick and your character will like see footprints in the sand if there's been like a major struggle here, or they might notice bits of the environment that otherwise weren't available. Like I mentioned in my little story about my little bandit friends, there's a hatch that was guarded by a monster that would one-shot me, and if I didn't sit there and study it while they were busy fighting without me, I wouldn't have been able to access this in any single way. And likewise, if it was locked, I'd have to lockpick it as well. So there's a lot of skills that are just there for exploration, and this game heavily rewards observation as well, because sometimes even that won't tell you where something is, and you might just have to say, okay, that wall looks a little weird, I'm gonna hit it with my sword and see what happens. Oh hey, I just took out a wall and suddenly there's like a whole new cave to explore. I'm not necessarily sure that I like that some of this is quantifiable and others are not. Like, some of these walls your observational skills don't really do anything on, and you just sort of have to whack it with your sword and hope for the best. And other times even if you know something's there, you can't really do anything unless you sit down and waste like 10 seconds trying to observe it. It's a little inconsistent, and I don't really like that. It makes it harder to pick up on specifically what's hidden and what isn't, because you expect it to be one way or the other, you know? I just would prefer some consistency in all this. But that said, there is a lot of hidden stuff in this game, and provided you're willing to look for it and pay attention to clues, you can find some really cool stuff. I appreciate that the maps in this game also are kind of hand-drawn by various merchants and stuff, so they're not necessarily reliable, but they kind of give a vague approximation of stuff, and because of that, you kind of can't rely on them entirely. That's a neat little touch that brings me back to like the original Thief. I love that a lot. You kind of have to work on your own maps instead of the ones other people hand you so that you can better interpret the data. And that's cool. Drova is a very mechanically deep and interesting adventure game. It has so much going on for it, and at any one time, even while I was just mindlessly wandering around the forest, I always had to be aware of about like 5 or 6 things. It was a very engaging experience, and I really appreciate that. This game, it did exploration right, and I really appreciate it for that. The presentation to Drova, if summed up into a single word, would be atmospheric. This game has a mood and a tone that it sets excellently. Visually, like I said, it's a little grim, a little grungy, a little grimy. It feels like a world where death waits around every corner, and you have to be careful about that. But there's still moments of great beauty here. Remember, I was just sort of wandering around very early on, and I ended up hitting a dead end, so I walked back, and I saw the sort of legendary sword sitting in a stone just across the way, and there was something about the way that the lighting in this game hit it that just, I had to stop and just record like 10 minutes of me just sitting there staring at this thing because it was just so pretty. There's a lot of really organic lighting in this game as well. If you have a torch, suddenly nighttime isn't so dark, but of course that takes up a slot in your hand, so you can't exactly fight with that. You'll have to drop the torch where you stand, but it gives you a portable light source at any point, or you could just fight in the dark like I do, because I like things as uncomplicated as possible. But, you know, fireflies will create sources of light in the environment. The lighting is really well done here. The only thing visually I don't really enjoy all that much is a few of the enemies do look a bit too samey. Like, 2 of the earliest enemies look kind of the same, and one is just a little bit bigger and a lot more deadly. And honestly, I think the game could use a little bit more color in the environments. You end up seeing a lot of green and brown, and we could use a few more flowers in places. Like, there are some, and they look nice for where they are, but I feel like a little bit more color here and there would be nice. Occupied environments with people in them look very, very nice. The individual monsters, for the most part, are really impressive and also terrifying, and also I had to run for my life from quite a few of them. So, you know, they're just as scary and deadly as they actually are, and that's cool. Audio-wise, like I said, it pretty much just sets a mood. I'm not sure there's all that much I'd listen to outside the game itself, but it works for what it needs to do. And overall, the presentation to this is very moody and very atmospheric, but it works so well for this weird, sort of misty afterlife land of legend sort of place that you're exploring. It's real good. Now, if you want a copy of Drova on Steam, it is currently available for about $32, and while that is definitely on the higher end for indie games for me in particular, I definitely think it's worth it. I have spent about 20 hours playing this game, and I am nowhere near finishing. You do get your money's worth in terms of sheer length if you're the kind of person who appreciates a longer game, and I don't think much of that time feels wasted. At least in the amount of time I've played, I've always been engaged with the exploration and the deep complex systems of how this game works. This game was absolutely amazing, and I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to the publisher Deck 13 for sending me a copy. Again, I thought I was too small to ever be acknowledged by publishers, but that's really cool. This game was a really fun adventure, and I mean, there's so much in this game for me to explore, so I'm not gonna lie, when I'm done recording this, I think I'm gonna have to go back and play a lot more because there's still so much of this game I still have to experience. But Drova, this was a surprise for me. I didn't expect to play this game. I didn't expect to play this game for free, and I have to say it was an amazing experience. Definitely a memorable one, and yeah, you should play it if you like these deep, complex adventure games.